Just because breastfeeding is going well doesn't necessarily mean that pumping will be easy. These are two really completely different skill sets. I spoke at a conference recently where I was teaching lactation professionals about pumping, and I highlighted the differences between removing milk with a baby and removing milk with a breast pump. And then I thought, wait, moms need this information too. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video, because honestly, a huge reason why I created my coaching program 2.5 years ago was because when I went back to work, we had worked really, really hard on getting breastfeeding, feeding at the breast going well. And I thought pumping would be easy. I seriously thought that you just would kind of show up, set a schedule, put the pumps on, milk would come out, and you'd move on with your day. And it was not that easy. In fact, the whole experience was really challenging for me and led me to want to help working moms who are separated from their babies use a breast pump to protect their supply and do it in the workplace. So if that sounds like something you're looking for, there is an application down below to get some help. But I want to talk about in this video the differences between these two things. I think it will help you understand kind of what you're facing, or if you're already facing pumping problems, maybe it'll shed some light on why that might be happening. So anyway, let's jump in. Okay, I'm in a little different place in my office today, mostly because we needed some space. Okay, so baby versus breast pump. There's just a few different things that happen based on how you're removing milk from your breast, okay? With a baby, we have a more on-demand feeding schedule, right? The baby is controlling when they want to eat, when milk is being expressed from your breast. With a breast pump, we have a more set expression schedule. You have to do that because your pump is not going to demand anything from you, right? So you need to control that schedule there. If you're using a baby to remove your milk, it requires that the baby has good feeding skills. This largely relies on their latch, on, positioning on your end, and how well they can transfer milk. If you want to protect your milk supply, it relies on good pumping skills, all right? This can be flange sizing, maximizing your letdowns, and getting the right settings, making sure you're emptying efficiently, using different pumping techniques, all of these things. Both things require efficiency in the way that you're doing it, right? They are two different things. Both ways require that you remove milk early and frequently, all right? Early postpartum and very frequently. That's the same either way if you want a good long-term milk supply. When a baby's removing milk, the supply is a little bit more variable, and it's based on infant demand. So if there's not enough supply or it's not coming fast enough, the baby's fixing that in theory, right? If they're good at nursing. With a pump, it's a little bit more consistent because you tend to be more consistent in the schedule, in the amounts, in the things that you're doing. Babies are humans, right? They're variable in and of themselves. So we tend to see a little bit of difference there as well. The infant does have real-time reactivity. So if there's a problem, the infant is going to react to it in real time. So for example, if you have less milk in the afternoons or like right before bed, your baby's been eating on you all day, there's more milk, they're going to give you more stimulation. They're going to try and trigger additional letdowns. They're going to try and react to this in real time. Same thing if they're sick or if they're going through a growth spurt. If they need more milk, they are going to try and trigger that. Just, it's natural. They're just going to do it on their own, right? You may not even notice. With a breast pump, the supply must be adjusted manually, right? You are in total control. So the breast pump doesn't know that your baby's sick and needs more milk, or that they're growing, or that they, you know what I mean? You have to do it yourself. So it tends to be, a little more stable, but it also does have to be adjusted manually. Both when you're using a baby and a breast pump, you need to have nighttime expressions. So especially if you're in the first several months postpartum, if you reduce nighttime feedings or nighttime pumpings in the first few months postpartum, your milk supply may see a decrease long-term that you may not love. With a baby removing milk, your milk supply tends to be controlled more long-term by the baby, which leads to a natural reduction in supply and weaning. Sometimes breastfeeding moms don't even notice that that's happening. When you're using a pump, the long-term milk supply is controlled by pumping efficiently. Okay, so if we're not removing all of the milk that we need to, the supply can come down. With a baby, they're likely going to be able to remove this unless there's an outstanding problem. I know those exist. But if the baby is removing milk, they're going to take what they want and they're going to keep increasing that. With a breast pump, a common problem that I see is that milk gets left behind. And it's not because, the pump doesn't have any demand. It's just doing what you tell it to do, right? The baby's like, that's not enough. I will not stop till I'm done. A pump you can stop them whenever you want. So pumping efficiently and removing the milk that is there is key to long-term success. It also means that you may have to more intentionally bring the milk supply down as the baby grows and needs less, and a more intentional weaning. Both types of expression, whether you're using a baby or a pump, require supply and demand. All right, you have to have demand if you want supply. These obviously look a little different, whether you're using a pump or a baby, but that's what we're talking about in this video. When you're using a baby to remove milk, letdowns tend to happen more easily. It's just kind of a biological reaction, right? And you may or may not even notice this. Some moms can feel their letdowns, some can't. We have a couple other videos on letdowns on the channel. I'll put those down below. But the baby can trigger these automatically. And so you may feel the first one, and then you may not notice, but your baby is likely triggering multiple other letdowns throughout the session whenever they're feeling like they want that more milk, or when the milk flow stops, they're triggering another one, okay? On a pump, you have to do this manually. So it's not just going to happen. You are going to have to kind of do some setting adjustments and maybe even some advanced techniques to make this work. And you definitely need more than one letdown during a pumping session. If you're only getting one at the moment, it's not enough. When using a baby, they may be able to get better at this over time, right? Babies are learning skills, you're learning skills, and you can see some improvements. They can get faster, more efficient, especially older babies. Sometimes they'll end up with 5 or 6 minute feedings and you're like, that was really fast. And sometimes they are just really efficient. With a pump, you're in control. So if you want better efficiency, you want faster sessions, you're going to have to do that, right? Your pump is not going to help you. It's on you to figure out how to do that. There are professionals to help you with both of these things, okay? IBCLCs are trained in latching and feeding at the breast help. They are great resources for you. I am an IBCLC, but I don't do any consults for direct breastfeeding. We do some of that in our program, but we don't do any one-on-one consults, but that's a great resource if you are struggling to get your baby to remove milk efficiently. If you're looking for pumping help, that is much harder, unfortunately. I'm so sorry, but I will continue to train other lactation professionals on how to support pumping mothers efficiently. But if you are a pumping working mom and you need help with this aspect, again, we do have a program to help you with that. Okay, let's talk about some of the pros and cons to both a baby and a breast pump when using that to express your milk. I think it's really important to be careful how we phrase the cons or the downsides here, because feeding an infant is hard, no matter how you do it, okay? Whether you're feeding at the breast, or whether you're pumping, or whether you're doing formula, or whether you're doing a combination of all of the things, it is hard. And many of these things, you're just trading for similar things on the other side, right? There's not a lot of really clear, like you only get this if you do it this way, and you only get this if you do it this way. A lot of the things really overlap. Some of the things you may view as a downside and others may view as an upside. So it was actually really hard to make these lists. So I did the best that I could, but realized that just because it's in the con column, it might actually be a pro for you, and that's okay. The grass is often greener on the other side, no matter what side you're starting on. Okay, some things that might be easier with a baby is the milk supply adjusts with the baby in real time. So if the baby's nursing well, it's adjusting as needed, all right? There's less risk of contamination in the milk, right? Because it's going direct from breast to baby. So there's not a lot of places that the milk can get contaminated. You get that direct transfer of antibodies and signals when they're directly skin to skin with you. Baby's in charge of how much they eat. So you don't really have to worry about, am I overfeeding them? Am I underfeeding them? They'll tell you when they're hungry, and they'll be able to take it from the breast if things are going well. This also allows for non-nutritive sucking. So if the baby just wants to suck for comfort or wants to practice some of those skills, that's available. With a bottle or pump, it's not always. Direct feeding at the breast also encourages correct development of the infant jaw and mouth, just a more natural kind of biological way of development. You will have more automatic letdowns and a little bit less brain power on those aspects because, again, the baby, you're two humans working together, so you get the give and take of that human relationship. You don't need to warm the milk or carry extra equipment. It's just on tap, ready to go, just how it is. You also have an unknown milk supply, which I actually put on both the pros and the cons list because you can think of it either way. If you're not monitoring the numbers, you're maybe not stressing about your milk supply. It may be a huge pro for you to just like, baby's gonna do their thing. I don't wanna see it. I don't wanna think about it. I also put that on the cons list. Unknown milk supply can be really difficult for a lot of mothers. If you don't have the numbers, if you cannot see what your baby is taking, sometimes it's overwhelming, and I totally get that. Being able to trust the process and to look at some of the other signs that we're looking for can be hard. But if you can kind of wrap your head around that, an unknown milk supply can be a pro. So some of the cons of the baby are we really do need efficient feeding skills to make sure that there's appropriate growth in the baby and the milk supply, all right? And if you've ever breastfed a baby before, you know that that can be tricky. And that's why IBCLCs are here to help you to get an efficient latch so that the baby's transferring milk well. Most babies and moms can, figure out something that works for them, but it's also hard. Another con is that it requires the mother and baby to always be together, which again, might be a pro for you, but it also might be a con. You never get to be separated. The baby needs you to drink milk. It can also be difficult to track baby's intake. Now, you don't have to track their intake, right? There are other signs that we can use to make sure that the baby is eating well and growing efficiently. Diaper output, weight gain, feeling satisfied after feedings, that kind of thing. But if you're someone that really likes data and numbers, you're not gonna be able to track how much they're eating. If you can kind of be okay with that, maybe it's a pro, but that can be a con. Your schedule's likely a little bit more unpredictable. Anytime you're feeding on demand, you're kind of at the whim of this little life, right? And so your schedule will probably look a little more unpredictable. There's a few more variables as well that affect your tissue and can cause damage. So, with a pump, it's just, there's like the one thing and you're doing the same thing over and over. It's very consistent. With a baby, sometimes their latch is good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they bite or clamp down or pop off funny. There's a few more variables. So sometimes we see a little bit more, variations in tissue damage than when we're using a baby at the breast. I know that wasn't an extensive list, but those were some of the highlights that I thought, highlighted baby at the breast, pros and cons. Now let's talk about pump pros and cons, okay? Some pros of using a breast pump to express your milk is you have a little bit more control over your scheduling, okay? You also have a baby, so sometimes that doesn't go always as planned, but in theory, you have a lot more control over your schedule. Milk expression schedule, maybe I should say. You can also be easily separated from your baby because your baby does not need you to be present to drink milk because you're able to pump it and then someone else can feed it in a bottle. So that can be a huge pro for a lot of moms, or potentially a necessary pro if you have to leave your baby for work or school or something like that. It's a little bit easier to create and manage an oversupply when you're using a breast pump. You're just naturally expressing more milk, and we're not having some of the same problems that we see with an oversupply when a baby's directly feeding at the breast. It can cause feeding problems. When you're using a pump though, it is a little bit easier to create that and or manage one that's already there. So not that I'm saying everyone should have an oversupply, but if that is where you're at or a huge goal for you, it is a little bit easier to manage with pump. Other caregivers can feed the baby. Oh, sometimes that's a huge pro, right? You can get a little touched out as a breastfeeding mom, I remember. But, it may also be a con on your list too if that's something that's really uncomfortable or foreign to you. It's so funny how you can just throw these on either side. You have data to track. Ooh, sometimes that's awesome. And I have had clients before that have chosen to exclusively pump actually because of that factor. They want the data, they want to see the numbers, they want to know exactly what's happening, and that's really important to them, right? Again, it can also be a con. It's a lot of data to track and it can be really overwhelming tracking that data, especially if you don't know what to do with it or you don't know how to fix it or you don't know what's normal. Yeah, we'll talk about that more in a second. Your milk supply tends to be a little bit more stable in general, at least consistent, because you're probably doing very consistent things if you're staying on a consistent schedule and not making a ton of changes, right? With your baby, you got two people there, a little more variables. And then you also have a known milk supply. You often know exactly where your milk supply is at. And I will say that I also put that on the con list. And it also depends on how efficiently you're pumping, right? Just because you're pumping 18 ounces a day doesn't mean that you have a low supply. You might just not be getting all the milk out that's there. So that is another difficult thing about pumping is if you have all these numbers and data to use, we really need to know what are we going to do with them, or it can cause more problems than not. But if you are pumping efficiently, you have a good handle on things, you know where your supply's at, you can kind of have a better idea of where things are at, right? So that can be a pro. Few cons is you have to keep a consistent schedule. So maintaining schedule consistency can be tricky, especially when there is no demand from your breast pump. Your breast pump is not going to start crying or saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. It's just sitting there waiting for you to do it. So sometimes consistency can be tricky. Pumping efficiently is vital for success. So if you have not mastered that skill, you have to, or you're not going to be able to keep it up. And your pump is not going to learn how to be better. It's on you. You do have double the feeding time, okay? So if you're feeding a baby at the breast, you're emptying milk and feeding the baby at the same time, right? With a breast pump, you have to empty the milk and then you have to feed it to the baby. So it is double the feeding time. You don't necessarily have to do the bottle feeding, but a lot of moms are, so it is what it is. You can also have tracking output anxiety, which we talked about a little bit before, but it's really, variations are normal, okay? We're humans, we're not robots. So you will see some variations, and that can really stress you out. If you pumped 24 ounces yesterday and you pumped 23 today, you might be like, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart like I'm dying. But it might be a normal variation, or there might have been another factor, and the next day you might pump 25 and then 23 and a half. And it can mess with your brain if you can't find a calm way to handle the numbers, okay? So either have some support in doing that or know what's expected, or just give yourself a lot of grace knowing that things are variable, okay? There is a higher risk for milk contamination. Again, you're taking it out of the breast, putting it in a bottle, you're probably storing it, even if you're directly feeding it there. We've got the bottle nipple coming in contact with the baby, milk storage, preparing the milk, how are we warming it up, storing it, freezing it. There's just higher risks for contamination when that's the process. You do have a constant need for equipment with you, so even if you do go out, you just need to take your pump, all right? To be fair, this is the same with a baby. Like, you have to always have the baby. So again, this is an example of just trading one thing for another. Would you rather always have to have the baby or a pump with you? It's kind of your call. You do have to also track the baby's intake and the bottle sizes, which is another variable for you to think about. So it's not, I just pump whatever and then feed that to the baby. There's a little bit more science to it. Again, you may be pumping more than the baby would take, or you may not be pumping all the milk that's there. Then how do we know what baby's taking? So it is just more tracking in general. You do have to manually trigger your letdowns. It's unlikely that these are just going to happen for you, especially multiple ones. So that is something that you're going to have to do. Milk supply, when you're pumping, is controlled by how much milk you remove. Okay, this is not different than with a baby, but it can be harder to make sure that you're removing the appropriate amount. Because with your baby, they're kind of deciding that based on their growth needs, right? And they're not thinking about it, it's just happening. With a pump, you kind of have to figure that out. How much should I be emptying right now? So that can be a little bit tricky. And then again, known milk supply was on both lists, but I think we can be even more aware of an uneven milk supply. I get this question a lot. Well, this breast makes more than this breast. To be honest, here's my theory. I think this happens no matter what. Everyone has a favorite side. Every baby does a little bit better in a position. I would imagine, even if you're feeding at the breast, that you probably have an uneven milk supply a little bit anyway. You just don't know it. So then you don't have to stress about it. But when you're pumping, sometimes you can see it, and now it becomes a stressor. Okay, so where does that leave us? When you're latching, you're really relying on trusting the biological process, right? You can't see the numbers. We don't have the data. And so, which is fine, right? If you can kind of get on board with that, it may be okay. You'll need some help getting the baby to latch at the breast. You do have 2 humans that you're working with, so that can be a little tricky, but a lot of things can be easier that way, right? When you're pumping, one of my favorite ways to describe this scenario is when you have more control, you have more control, okay? And I think it can be both a good and a bad thing. You are in control, right? The pump is not demanding anything from you. It's also not going to help you. This is kind of all on you. So just knowing that, I think, can kind of help, right? If that feels totally overwhelming, maybe more feeding at the breast is the way to go. But if you also want the data and numbers and you want you to be in that control, maybe the pump is the way to go. Sometimes we have to do a combination of both, right? Whether we choose to or we have to. And when you're combining using a baby to express milk versus a pump to express milk, you kind of have the best and the worst of both worlds. This is the type of mom that I typically work with who are doing some kind of combination, although many working moms tend to just maybe just would exclusively pump anyway, which is totally fine. I don't care. I'm a pumping support expert and a coach for working moms. So it gets complicated, right? And I know I'm going to get comments. I get these often on the channel already, like, well, I'm breastfeeding, feeding at the breast here, and then I'm, pumping here. Like, what's a normal output? And there's a lot of variables. I get it. It's very confusing and it's very individualized. It can be really hard to figure out which area is lacking if there becomes a problem, because these are 2 completely different skill sets. I hope that that is the main takeaway that you're taking away from this video, is that feeding at the breast and pumping are 2 different skills, right? These require different recommendations. They require different ways to solve problems that come up. They have different sets of problems, and they have different benefits to each way too. They are different skills. And so I think it's really important that you just kind of understand that. And IBCLC can be great for helping you with at the breast. Pumping support can be a little harder to find. Some IBCLCs are more experienced in that than others. So just seek one that is more capable of helping with pumping. If you're a working mom and that's going to be part of your life long term, again, there's an application down below to work with me and my team. I speak at conferences as often as I can, trying to help lactation professionals. And I ran through these same lists a lot with them, a little bit more in depth with a little more academic research in there too. But it's different. And I think sometimes we expect it to be the same, and it's not. And it's okay. It's okay that they're different. However you want to feed your baby is your choice, and you get to decide. And sometimes we lose the choice when things get hard and we're forced to do something we want, which is my least favorite scenario to see. I hate it when you're forced to do something that you don't want to do because things aren't working. But my heart goes out to you, however you decide to feed your baby, because all ways are difficult. Motherhood is difficult. And if I can help in any way, please let me know. Tell me any other things that I may have missed from my list, or things that you've experienced, whether you thought it was a pro or a con. Put those in the comments. I would love to hear from all of you and have some discussion down there. If you need any help, again, there's some links in the description where if you can work with me. Otherwise, good luck and happy pumping.